Good evening, everybody. I'm Councillor Claudine Russell, the Chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and pleased to welcome you to this meeting of the committee. The meeting is going to be broadcast live and recorded for playback on the Council's YouTube channel. Will anybody else be recording the proceedings? I ask just so people at the meeting will know if this is happening. We don't have our friend Councillor Mackay with us tonight, so it looks like that's a no, not tonight. We haven't got any fire drills planned, so if the fire alarm sounds, please remain seated. We'll get you out of the building as soon as possible. Bringing us on to tonight's agenda, we've got item number 1, which is apologies for absence. So I have received apologies from Councillor Cook, Councillor Field, Councillor Harper, Councillor Mackay and Councillor Joanna Wilkinson. Are there any other apologies? Councillor Keane?
Thank you. Yes, we sent an apology for Councillor Rodwell as well. It did come through. I had to do it for her as a reason for it, which I copied her in and Cassie's aware. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. So Councillor Rodwell as well. Got that? Yep. Can I have notification of substitute members? I'll go around this way. Councillor Wilkinson.
Yeah, Councillor Dan Wilkinson for Councillor Joe Wilkinson, Madam Chairman.
Thank you.
Councillor Jenkins-Baldock for Councillor Mackay.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Wilby for Councillor Field.
Lovely, thank you. That's it. Lovely. Okay, urgent items. We've got a couple of bits from the different updates from the working group. So you should have on your desk. You should have on your desk the little update A4 page from the working group, the most recent one where we had the Kent County Council stakeholder meeting. So that's the main points through that discussion. And then we've got another item which is just a couple of points that were raised at the different policy advisory committees before we have a look at some of the items on tonight's agenda, and that's just another one-pager. So have you all seen those and read them? Happy to proceed? Lovely, thank you. Notification of visiting members. I can't see any visiting members other than we've got Cabinet Member Councillor Cox and Councillor Nagy. Any disclosures by members or officers? Councillor Kahili?
Thank you. Just regarding item 15, I need to make it clear that I work for a charity myself, just for transparency.
Lovely, thank you. Can't see anybody else. Any disclosures of lobbying? No, can't see anybody indicating. So we have got yellow papers before us this evening in relation to item 17. If we can keep the discussion within part 1 as much as possible, I'd like to do that. If we feel that we can't do that, we need to refer to the yellow papers. I'll remind you again at the start of the item, we'll obviously need to move this into part 2 this evening. Is that agreed? Lovely, thank you. So that brings us on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of November, pages 1 to 4 in your agenda packs. Are there any comments about the accuracy of those minutes? Can't see anybody indicating, so I'm happy to sign those. We'll do that at the end. Item 9, we haven't got any petitions this evening. Item 10, we haven't got any questions from local residents. And item 11, we haven't got any questions from members, which moves us on to item 12, which is the Cabinet Forward Plan for this committee, in general, which is pages 5 to 18 of your agenda packs. Have we got any comments on the Cabinet Forward Plan? No, I can't see anybody indicating. We have got one comment that's been put forward by Councillor Harper, who can't attend this evening. He's unfortunately very unwell. So I'm happy to read it out. He said, as all councillors will be aware, he's got a strong interest for the council to progress with getting supplementary planning documents and guidance relating to HMOs. At the Planning and Healthier Communities Pack last week, the director suggested that we look to get a special cross-committee working party to look into this issue as it covers parking, planning and licensing. It seems that as all councillors want to get this issue addressed as quickly as possible, that the best way, rather than setting up a new structure, would be for Overview and Scrutiny to do it as a policy development and review process, and we could set up a 5-member working party like we're doing for our current work, the SIL, and move on to planning enforcement. because as Overview and Scrutiny has a cross-council remit, he thinks this would be the best way to go forward. I don't know if anyone else has got any comments on that. Councillor Wilby?
Only that I know the SPD for the HMOs is quite close to actually going out. That's going to Cabinet to be discussed. So that would actually put some policies in place that we could use now. So more reviews, but I think actually, to the truth, we need to get that first strategic policy in place first before then looking at it in more detail to go with the parking and etc. and the other stuff that Councillor Harper wants to go over.
Okay. Well, you are the chair of Planning Committee, so I trust you have the up-to-date knowledge on that. I think probably maybe a good way forward then would be to just have it here as pre-decision scrutiny, because if that would be the same people looking at it, and then it's going for the Cabinet to have the final decision. So I think if my way forward on that would be to bring that here to just have a look at before it goes to Cabinet. Does the committee feel that's agreed? Yeah, that's that. What's this? Okay, so moving on to our committee work programme, which is on page 19, we're sort of coming to the 19 and 20, we're coming to the conclusion of some of our work now on the section 106 and seal item that we've been looking at. Hopefully we're going to bring that to committee for a final report looking at February time. And then we've got the planning enforcement topic, which we'll move on to after that. Obviously that hasn't got a date yet, just because it will be on the conclusion of the first one. And then on the second page, page 20, we've got the items that this committee have asked to be called in to Overview and Scrutiny for either pre or post decision scrutiny to have a look at. Has anybody got any comments on this committee's working plan? Councillor Kehealy?
Sorry, it's more on the relevance of page 21. I don't understand quite why that's there. What does it tie in with, please?
Yeah, so this page 21 is obviously it's quite an old letter, but what's happened in the changeover from one administration to another, previous people wrote to Medway Council asking them about the household waste recycling, because that was the item, if you remember, that they were doing Overview and Scrutiny, all to do with the waste. So it's just really here to just close that final piece of information on that last topic that they were doing, just for interest purposes, really, unless anyone wants to make any comment on it. No. Okay, so that moves us on to item 14, which is our update on the work that we've been doing, which is the Section 106 and Community Infrastructure Levy Review. We had an opportunity this week to have a sit-down meeting with Kent County Council officers, who are obviously one of our main providers of large items of infrastructure. That was really interesting. I know that hopefully people in the working group thought it was as well. We had our pre-prepared questions that we'd worked out, but we did have quite an in-depth chat about the bigger items such as highways, infrastructure, educational provision. So, and I think that will feed through into some recommendations that will come forward for Section 106 and seal. We've got the timeline still on page 30. And we're still hoping to keep mainly to that. So as I said, we'll hope to have our final report here for the 11th of February committee meeting. Has anybody got any comments they'd like to raise on that? Councillor Hickson?
Yeah, with regard to the second bullet point on the additional sheet, to claim back unspent 106 monies, the developer would need to submit a request to KCC in writing. The officers were not aware of any incidents where this had happened. Can I ask, which officers? Were they KCC officers? And then were follow-up questions asked regarding whether or not KCC were relying on developers not requesting the money back?
Yeah, so I can't remember their, have you got their names? It was Colin Finch, who was to do with the education, and then we had David Joyner and Lee Birchall, I think. I'm reaching for Birchall, I think it was. Yes. Who were the highways guys. So obviously they're the main bits of kit. So they have not sent back from those two provisions from KCC, they have not sent back any money to developers. They did, however, say that they haven't been requested to send any money back either. So I feel like we are relying on a bit of goodwill. They're not requesting the money back, but as it stands, they haven't sent any back. So that is a good thing. That's not to say they've spent it all either. Any other comments on that? Councillor Oliver?
Just on this extra sheet that we were given, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th bullet point, and it says about the two projects that were brought forward, the M20 Junction 7 has not yet received funding. Why is that? Is that because it's paused, or is that because, what's the reason for it not receiving the funding?
So a lot of the funding that they have for some of these bigger areas rely on multiple funds. So sometimes they balance each other out. So they have the SIL funding, but they also need to get some national highways funding. One waits for the other, and as yet, it's not balanced out. Yeah. The Bearsted Road one as well was waiting. That was waiting to do with some contractual things that were going on, so he couldn't get into too much detail about that, but they still have that as one of their projects going forwards. Any other comments on that work? Councillor Higson?
Just to point out the penultimate point on this, where it states that reports go to Maidstone JTB on progress and spend. As a member of JTB, we haven't had much progress or very good reports from KCC, and I'd just like to point that out.
Yeah, I mean, as the previous chair of JTB for over a year, we didn't have much progress on any of the MITP schemes. Having said that, we did dig into this a little bit on behalf of JTB, and they assure us that they are currently working on a report that will come to JTB. They couldn't give a date for that. We did press, but they were talking about potentially the February or that time, because it needs to fit in with their budget preparations as well. But they are working on a report, so we shall await it with interest. Any other comments? No? Okay. So we're going to move on now to item 15, which is our discretionary rate relief policy, which is on page 32 to 93 of your agenda pack. I think Councillor Cox might be introducing this item, is that right? Lovely, thank you. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chair. So I apologise in advance for a slightly long introduction, but it's a paper that we've had some discussion on at other packs, and so it's probably just worth that introduction to get everybody to the same base. So first of all, thank you to Zoe, who's beside me here, and also the officers for all of the consultation that they've supported and the policy update, and really just to mention that's been a substantial piece of work. So very grateful for that. The business rates discretionary relief policy has been reviewed and updated to ensure it meets the needs of the borough. A consultation was carried out for a period of 6 weeks from mid-September to the end of October, and 45 people / organisations responded in that consultation. The report sets out the reasons for having a discretionary rate relief policy and the outcome of the consultation and the rationale for the recommendation. I think it's worth just mentioning quickly at this point that we have an obligation to protect all business rates and council rate payers, and so there's a balance in these papers. Contents of the report, first of all, in terms of the drivers behind the policy, the Local Government and Finance Act 1988 and the Localism Act 2011 require the council to grant discretionary relief to premises occupied by charities or to organisations that are non-profit making. Actually, I was just note for self whether I was going to say something different there. No, fine, good. When designing a policy, the council needs to consider whether the granting of the relief would be of benefit to the local community There is also a need to consider the interest of the council taxpayers when designing the policy and considering applications when they're received. So further details of the framework of that's that decision process and the factors in it are on pages 34 and 35. The cost of the scheme for 2023-24 is found on table 1 on page 34. And just to summarise, the cost to MBC in that year 23-24 was just under 72,000 for running the scheme. The policy needs to have reasonable detail, but it doesn't need to define every situation to the nth degree. It's got to be workable, and we can't legislate for every single scenario we might come across. So it's important, we believe, that we give the officers the opportunity to use their assessment and their emotional intelligence in assessing those cases. There is a risk in not having a policy that there could be applications from non-profit making organisations that provide no benefit to the borough or to residents, and this could lead to increased costs for taxpayers without the services or facilities being provided. Right, so bona fide benefit to residents of the borough is a primary consideration. The policy that was consulted on is in Appendix 1, which is on page 39, and the responses, which I thought helpfully were by consultee type, from the consultation are in Appendix 2 on page 54. A letter was received from Teeston Parish Council also, and this is separately listed at Appendix 3, page 60. The comments in that letter are responded to within the appendices, which I'll mention in a second. And that was discussed actually with one of the parish councillors of Teeston at the Climate Transition Corporate and Environmental Services Pack on the 3rd of December. So the main concerns coming from the consultation and incorporating Teeston Parish Council are highlighted in bold, not in yellow as they were at the pack. To all comments are found on Appendix 5, page 69. Appendix 6, this is the output of all of those appendices in the consultation, is on page, I've said 77, I think it's a little bit further. I'll give you the page number in a second. And that's an amended version of the policy, which comes from the consultations, obviously sort of like other inputs, and importantly as well, a couple of comments which were minor typos from the CTCES pack. Nearly all suggestions to the policy, changes to the policy have been made. Where they haven't, an explanation for that is given in the comments on Appendix 5. And a final, for your information really, item number 44, page 76. It states that CIOs and CICs, so charitable investment organisations and community interest companies, have been given de facto status stroke clarification as charities by MBC. And that's an important point because some of the comments we had were very much around, is this sort of charity included? Is that sort of charity? I'm a CIC, etc. So the classification was important in the discussion. Fine, almost there. Recommendations. You're recommended to note the outcome of the discretionary rate relief policy consultation, to consider the amendments to the policy from the consultation, and to consider recommending to Council that the policy is adopted. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that full introduction. I've got Councillor Parfitt and then I'll have Councillor Hickson.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question. Does having charitable status automatically grant you this relief? Or is there any kind of, because some charities are actually very, very cash rich. I mean, I know because my mum used to work for one, the Guide Dogs for the Blind, for example, they have an awful lot of reserves. So to me, I think I would like to see it based more on need rather than purely just charitable status. But that was my question. Thank you.
I'll give a very high level, and then Zoe obviously can go into all the detail you want. So the answer is no, because actually it's about assessment, officer assessment, and the reason for that, you could have a commercial organisation or some sort of community organisation that isn't any of those CICs, CIOs, etc., or a charity, but it sets up a charitable arm where it's sort of taking money. So it looks like the balance sheet here is flat, but actually it's moving resources over there into a charity or vice versa. And we've got to be able to assess those complex structures sort of like in the round. So no, it's not an automatic pass. And so I think there's also a 3-year reassessment process of each application. But that's the level of my detail at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you. So charities get 80% charitable relief. It doesn't matter what the charity is. If you're a registered charity with a charity number, we have to give them 80%. That is statutory. Amateur sports clubs, we also, if an organisation is registered as an amateur sports club, we also have to give them 80% as well, relief. That is a separate section of the policy, and there was a bit of confusion last week that we removed them from the charity part, but they're separate organisations. And then we're left with everything else, and they all come as non-profit making. And last week we were asked to move some of them into the charity part, but we can't because that's not part of the legislation. So the part that's covered under the legislation, like guide dogs for the blind, etc., we're funded for that by the government. We award that, and then that goes as part of our non-domestic rates return, and that is a separate section, and they say you've awarded this much, and it's probably millions, and we get that money back. So then we go on to the non-profit making organisations, and the purpose of the policy is to ensure we're supporting local charities and that they're getting help. And if a massive, great big charity, national charity, decides to have their headquarters here, we can decide what are they doing for the local area. Nothing. We won't top them up by 20%. So that's the purpose. Is we were hoping that the policy will be helping all the local charities that are supporting local people and helping local people. The wording's been slightly changed to include parish councils, and we've taken out within the borough and put in within the local area, because there were some thoughts around if you're in a village, a local area is far tighter than, if it's a more urban area. So we've changed the wording to acknowledge that.
Thank you very much. Councillor Higson.
Good evening. My question is kind of related to that. I'm thinking about what if an organisation changes its charitable status or loses its charitable status? Is there recourse then to reassess? I'm thinking in particular, we've heard the headlines of independent schools losing their charitable status. So would they at the moment be getting this relief, and then maybe later they're not going to get this relief? If you could sort of elaborate on that a little bit for us, please.
I think it's best if I come back to you on that. There was a select committee today on non-domestic rates, particularly on the private schools, so I haven't listened to it yet, but I think there'll be information coming out from that. Schools is always a bit of a tricky area. There's some that get charitable relief and there's others that don't. We would have to make sure, if they're not classed as charities, for us to help them, they'd have to be non-profit making. Last week I gave an example of golf courses and whether they're supporting the local area or are they supporting a select group of residents, and they would say to another group of residents, no, you can't come along. And so it will be with private schools. It will be interesting to see how local authorities, all local authorities across the country, deal with it, and whether we get some guidance from government about how we should be dealing with them if they're saying they're non-profit making. So I'm not really answering your question today. I think we'd have to come back on that, and we'll have more information before April.
Councillor Wilby.
Thank you, Chair. I should have probably declared an interest. Sorry, my wife does work for a charity within the borough, and obviously I'm chairman of a charity that's within the borough as well. That's it.
Thank you. Councillor Kehealy.
Chair. Just got a couple of questions. With the mandatory rural rate relief, have you got figures of how many charities or organisations that relates to last year and this year? I'm particularly interested to see if the figure with the population goes over 3,000, that's changed any eligibility for any villages. I'm thinking of villages that have had a lot of movement and population. And also, sorry, on page 41, can you just explain what temporary relief for partly occupied properties means, please? Thank you.
So the rural relief, I'd have to come back to you with the figures for that. And so I've been here in January for 3 years, and I haven't as yet looked at the areas within Maidstone. We have done it previously in Swale, and for example we removed Iwade from Swale because there was a lot of development there, and it has crossed my mind that we would need to look at where the amount of properties and population has increased. We have to, information has to be given to us, so we would then look at it. It's a surprisingly low amount of organisations that do claim it through rural rate relief. It used to be 50% funded by the government, 50% funded by us. It's now all funded by the government. And so it's less of a funding, I don't want to say burden, because it's not a burden supporting rural communities. But so I'll come back on the figures on that. Your second question, section 44A, partly occupied properties. So any business, this is nothing to do with charities, any business, if it's moving out of a property, can claim help towards its rates. So, for example, if the British Heart Foundation across the road, just as a business that I've noticed as I've walked down the road, if they decided they're only using part of their shop and part of it they're giving up, they can ask us to have a reduction in their rates. We would go and look at the shop and decide whether they met the criteria, and then we go to the valuation office agency and we ask them to reduce the rates. So that is within the policy as something that can be awarded. We don't often award it, but we can award it.
Lovely, thank you. So I can't see anybody recommending that we don't adopt the new policy. So in line with the preferred option on page 37, I'm happy to propose from the Chair that we adopt the policy after making the changes suggested in Appendix 5. Have I got a seconder? Councillor Wilby, thank you. Has everyone agreed? Lovely, thank you. That takes us on to item 16, which is the fees and charges report for 2025-26, and I believe Councillor Cox is introducing this one as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I promise this one will be quicker. So just a little bit of background. In terms of the charging policy, there's both a principle and a spirit to be followed. And one of the quotes that jumped out at me is that this policy needs to be fair, transparent and understandable. It applies to discretionary services as opposed to statutory, which are set by the government. The principle is that service users should make a direct contribution to the cost of the service that they're using and therefore we're providing. Also an overarching requirement that it covers the cost to MBC of providing that service. And supports improvement of services in the Council's strategic plan. Subsidies or concessions must be targeted towards delivery of the services, and the process to update must be administratively simple. We don't want to create something you need a PhD in maths to sort of basically calculate and model. So we took the budget feedback into account and adjusted those responses to make sure that we skew any changes towards residents using those services. So each year, officers review the fees and charges set by the Council. This report sets out the proposed fees and charges for services within this committee's remit, and that's at Appendix A, page 106. You are asked to recommend these. The fees and charges for services covered by PACs are set out in Appendices C to D, page 132 to 148 is where they start. We've also taken the opportunity with this report to present the results of the annual residents' budget survey, and that's summarised in Appendix E, page 149, with a comparison to last year's results in Appendix F, page 163. So in terms of details, the approach taken by officers when determining fees and charges is determined by the policy Appendix B, page 1322, and that's the document I referenced in terms of the principles. I just very quickly wanted to thank Mark and all of his team for all of the work on the fees and charges. We've been through 2 or 3 iterations, and I know that's not always an easy process for everybody who has to look into it, so thank you. It's important to stress the contribution made by fees and charges to overall council budgets. The tables on pages 101 to 102 show that fees and charges contribute over 11 million to the council's overall budget of around 50 million. The policy makes clear that cost recovery should be maximised when setting fees and charges. General inflation next year is expected to be around about 2.5%, but inflation as experienced by the council is nearer 4% because largely one of our biggest items on our revenues budget is salaries related, and so there's a skew there towards annual pay rises, and that's about half of our expenditure budget. So this therefore gives an indication of the default level of increase required in order to maintain cost recovery. In practice, specific factors relating to individual services mean that some fees and charges will increase by more than 4%, some than less. And there are many, when you go through the schedule, that are statutory, and so they can't be moved, and there's a note in the right-hand side that indicates that. The main area where specific factors apply are parking services, which are set out on pages 114 to 119, where there has been no increase in charges for off-street parking since 2019-2020, in spite of prices rising generally by about 25%. And I did a back of a not quite fag packet calculation. If you compounded the rate of inflation, sort of like at CPI or retail price index, over those years, what would they have been if we just kept up with inflation? And it is sort of just over 24%. It's therefore proposed that there be a phased return to previous charging levels with an increase of 15% in 25-26, and obviously decisions taken in other years about what we do to catch up on the remainder. You're recommended to note the contents of the report, please. Oh, actually, sorry, different recommendations. Hold on. Here we go. It's been updated. You are asked, please, to make the following recommendations to Cabinet: that the contents be noted, but the committee may choose to comment on the contents. The fees and charges as detailed in Appendix A be approved. The fees and charges policy as in Appendix B be noted. The fees and charges as detailed in Appendices C and D for the other policy advisory committees be noted. And the budget survey results in Appendices E and F be noted. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I can't see anyone indicating to speak. Oh, I've got a couple now. So I'm going to kick off quickly from the chair. I noticed that you mentioned the car parking fees are going up by about 15%, but I'd like to understand the thinking behind the Moat Park car parking fees, which are actually going up by 50%. Thank you.
Yes, the rationale behind that is that the fees for Moat Park haven't been increased for an even longer period. I think they last went up in 2017-18. And in that period, you've seen a lot of improvements in Moat Park. You've got the new cafe, considerable investment in Moat Park. So both because of the inflation since they last went up and because what visitors to Moat Park are getting is improved, it was felt by the Cabinet that the increase to £3 was perfectly justified. And of course, if you visit Moat Park, particularly in the summer, you know how busy the car park is. So it's clearly in high demand, and that fee of £3, I think, is still quite modest for parking there.
I'm not sure a 50% increase in one hit is quite modest if you're trying to take your family out for the day for quite a cheap/free activity. I'm going to open it up to the debate, which is I've got Councillor Cannon and then Councillor Parfitt. Thank you. And then Councillor Wilby. And then Councillor Keeley.
Thank you. Could I ask Mark, if possible, when was my understanding is that parking, we've frozen parking over the last few years. Could you just tell me how long it's been frozen for? Just remind me of that. And then just secondly, on the Moat Park element, while I know houses immediately close to Moat Park might walk a dog by walking to the park, as you'd expect and encourage, people further away still walk dogs, and actually £3 a time for taking a dog for a walk it does add up. So whether there was some sort of permit for that would be helpful, I think.
The fees last went up in 2019-20, so they haven't gone up since before COVID.
Councillor Parfitt.
Thank you, Chair.
Your microphone.
The waste crime charges, are they currently at the maximum that they can be? So things like for littering, £250, fly tipping, etc. Is that the maximum we're allowed to charge?
I'd have to come back to you on the legal position. I would point out, though, that with these ones, it's really difficult to recover the money. So, I mean, there's a bit of a trade-off in that if you put them up even more, then it becomes more difficult to recover. But I'll come back to you on the specific point about whether that is the maximum.
Yes, because I'd certainly rather see people that are committing crimes be penalised more than somebody that's wanting to go and walk their dog. The other questions I'd just had is parks and open spaces, the income has fallen quite substantially from what I understand, and I'm not the best with figures, so if I've made a mistake, I do apologise, but it does look like parks and open spaces, the revenue has decreased, yet we're putting up car parking charges in those areas. That doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. For example, the market as well, that has fallen, and we're putting car parking charges up by 15% in the town. I just think, and I suppose you would expect me to say this because I was part of the administration that really wanted to keep car parking levels down, and that is still my view. I think we should be trying to encourage as much people to come into the town centre as possible. So yeah, that's really what I'm trying to understand is the rationale when we've got falling revenues in these areas, we are then trying to penalise people for then coming to support those areas. And yes, there is a season, and I also thought the season ticket increase was quite substantive as well. And again, I would have thought we should be doing everything we can to encouraging people to pay up front and pay a set fee rather than relying on people coming and paying in dribs and drabs. So it's just the rationale behind some of these decisions don't really make a lot of sense to me. And I'll be honest, it's not something that I would want to support, this, especially these increases on the car parking. And I agree, the Moat Park one, that was going to be my final question, why that's gone up by 50%, like I say, when the revenue has fallen. And it is, as Councillor Cannon said, if you're going to walk your dog £3 a time and you walk your dog every day, £21 a week could potentially.
Councillor Cox, do you want to come back on this?
Yeah, and just on the dog walking one, I think just from personal experience. So I drive to Moat Park. It's one of many places I could, hopefully you just get out of your house and go for a walk for the dog, and that's mostly what we do. But actually when we park at Moat Park, we happily do so, we happily pay £3. It's a £1 difference to what it is now. And actually if you look at the hours that you can stay for that £3, it's actually quite a long period of time. So it's not people don't just go for a dog walk, they go for the day out, as Mark was alluding to. The park and open spaces revenues, and Mark will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's particularly relating to Coventry. And there was a reduction because there was an absence of a cafe there for a period. The cafe closed and now new tenants are taking it over, and I believe it's live. But when we're talking to Mike Evans, who's responsible for Cobtree, the actual lot of the facilities there, including the car park, need upgrading, and the charges there aren't sort of pari passu. They're not on a par actually with some of the other places you could go and park. So he felt it was important to normalise that. And that the market, I believe, so the revenues there aren't just about the market, they're about the other business activities in Lockmeadow, and there's some new tenants coming in. And so, yes, the revenues aren't just related to the market, it's relating to sort of Lockmeadow as a whole.
Councillor Wilby?
Thank you, Chair. One will be about well, I've got a few actually, but one will be about the planning and conservation. The fees we charge for that, do they actually cover the cost of the work the officers put in for the applications? Because it's been alluded to me that they don't cover that cost, and we could possibly, I don't like to tax people for the sake of taxing people, but if people are abusing the planning policy, the process, we should be charging them correctly for those processes. So that's one question, Mark. I've got a couple. With Moat Park, I probably got from Dave. One of the councillors remember when they actually just put the parking in, the parking fees in, and that caused an outrage when that actually happened. I remember there being quite a big thing about it. So I do think the 50%. I do agree it's not a lot, but I think we've probably missed the thing where we should have increased it over the years rather than in a one hit. But to do with Moat Park, I drive past the old park and ride every day, which is shut. Are we going to reopen that to increase revenue? Because as we said, you go there on the weekend, getting into Moat Park, it can be a real issue. And we use the overflow car park, which is the grass, which then gets all turned up. Are we going to reopen the other car parks to actually increase the income to go with it? And just on also with the parks and open spaces, is part of that revenue reduction due to the fact that we've reduced the amount of sports pitches we've got on some of our parks? Because I know the park in South Park, for example, I think it used to have 5 pitches, we've now got 3, for example. So I just want that clarified as well, please, Mark.
I'll go through the different questions. On planning fees, there's a difference between the statutory fees for making applications, which we don't set ourselves, those are set by the government, and you're right that those don't cover the full cost of the planning process. And in fact, earlier this year, the government consulted on a potential increase to planning fees to a level which might allow us to recover our costs, and that would be very welcome, because at the moment it means that all the other services are subsidising planning. And there are some services in planning that where we set the fees, so we can charge for pre-application advice, and we do that, but we don't want to put people off taking that advice by having the charges too high, because it should lead to a smoother process if we can advise people in advance. On the Willington Street car park, Councillor Cox may want to comment on this, but it's very much at the forefront of both officers and members' minds that there's a resource there that we could potentially use. So I would hope that plans will come forward over the next year for that. And on parks, I mean, it's a mixed bag so far as income is concerned. I mean, we haven't done so well with sports pitches, and we've frozen the level of fees for those because we don't want to discourage people from hiring football pitches. Obviously, I mean, it's a great resource for sports clubs. And generally, the consideration, or one of the considerations that officers are asked to take account of when setting fees is what's actually happening in the market. It's crazy to put up fees if you're not getting the business. But on car parks, going back to that, I mean, particularly with, for example, the King Street car park, some of the car parks are really very busy. So there's a good commercial justification for putting up the fees there. Same goes for Moat Park.
Come back, yeah.
So my actual question to the parks was about how is that reduction to do with the fact we reduce the amount of football pitches, rugby pitches and stuff we've got marked to go with that. And then with the planning fees for the pre-plan applications, is that on a graded system? For example, do we have it so if you're putting in a pre-application for one house, it's one fee, and then but if you're putting in for 250 homes, then obviously it should be a larger fee? Or are we just doing a standard one size fits all?
I'd have to come back to you on the sports pitches. I'm not sure whether there's a direct relationship between the volume of income and where we have closed or removed pitches. On the planning fees, if you look at the detail, you'll see that it is there are tiered charges, so there are higher charges for bigger developments.
Councillor Kehealy.
Thank you. With the parking, I just think, people are going to say this isn't very green and it's not very hypocritical. It is very hypocritical, which is something that some of the less nice things on social media have said. If we're putting the parking up to discourage people coming into town and to use public transport, we need to look at public transport more. And is some of this money being diverted to supporting that? I can't do my jobs without a car. I physically can't do it. It would take me 2.5 hours from leaving my house to get to my place of work on one particular thing, and I wouldn't be able to get back without walking 1.5 miles in the dark on unlit roads, which obviously with everything with the Borg, and we're looking for White Ribbon accreditation at the moment, is something that's forefront of our minds. So I have to keep my car. That said, I have a parking permit for for here tonight, otherwise it would cost about £4.50 a night. 2 meetings a week, that's £9. That's either in our pockets or we put that through expenses, but we get a parking permit for what we're doing now. I know we get an allowance, not a wage. I'm not actually against them going up particularly, but we do need to remember that we have permits for coming here and the general public do not have a permit to come into town. Like Councillor Parfitt, I'd picked up on the waste crimes and I'd like to see them at the absolute max as an absolute deterrent. People coming into town and parking, maybe ethically, people might have a view on that, but they're not doing anything wrong, they're not doing anything illegal. And I think we should throw the full weight of legislation to uphold when people are doing something legal or illegal. If it's statutory, it's statutory. And the other one that did worry me was the bereavement services. The cost of those have gone up quite a lot. And that's already an incredibly expensive time, with a UK average for cremations 4k and a burial 5k, and that really isn't something that we can avoid at all.
Councillor Cox, you want to come back on some of that?
Sure, I'll try and do these in reverse order. So every point you've made are exactly, when Mark and his officers and I were sitting down and we were running through the schedule, we were challenging in that way. The cremation ones are interesting because there is a revenue downturn, and actually it's for 2 reasons. One is that fewer people are dying, and actually that's not just in our area. If you look at national statistics, that's the case, and that's partly because one of the consequences of COVID, that there was sort of part of the not just older people, but actually sort of went in the COVID period, and now we've got younger older people who eventually will age. So that will come back. But the second one, which I think is probably more of a concern, is there's a trend for the direct to cremation type services rather than, so the average cost on a cremation has gone from 5,000, way south of that, but we've still got the fixed cost of running the crematoria. So that's why there's an adjustment, and just bring everybody back to the principle that and this is without sort of like cross-cutting across different sort of like areas, from parking to waste to crematoria. The cost of the service has to be covered by those using it. So absolutely, same challenge on waste, and morally, why would we let people who are abusing the system on waste or on even planning enforcement get away with lower tariffs? And we've been able to successfully push the fees up on those where we can, and again, it has to be related to the actual cost of service. So I'm saying it's here, I'd like it to be here. We can't do that because it doesn't relate to the actual cost of service. So there's that balance. But we did push them up on planning enforcement because there was an opportunity to do that. And it felt right? If you're going to sort of like, break the rules, then you should pay for the cost of that. So on parking, this was one of the things that we were really mindful of, especially on regular parkers. And there are parking permit opportunities that people, a season ticket in effect, that people can come and buy. But one of the concessions in here you may not have noticed, we're very aware that for people who live in the town centre, that there's a lot of parking, on-street parking. And actually what we wanted, and this is at night time, we wanted to give people the reason to actually go into the off-street car parks. And so the fees for those have been dropped, correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but 50% for that reason. So that's a concession in the opposite direction that partly balances some of the, the increases if you just take those on face value. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Councillor Higson and then Councillor Parfitt and then Councillor Cannon.
Thank you. Is there an estimate of how much of this additional revenue is coming from outside of the borough, i.e. visitors? So things like car parks and things like that. Visiting Moat Park, lots of people from outside Maidstone go to Moat Park. So that's money coming into the borough that wouldn't ordinarily be coming into the borough. Could there be a way maybe of rewarding local people? I know you mentioned about the people who live in the town centre. The way in which it operates in terms of parking is it's like number plate, isn't it? So you put your number plate in. Is there a way maybe that we could get people to register their number plates, and if they are Maidstone residents, they get a slight discount? And then finally, you kind of touched on this as well, but is there anywhere where the cost of charging and enforcement is actually higher than the revenue that we're taking in?
First of all, I'm not aware that we've got any statistics on where people are coming in from outside the borough. It'd be quite difficult without a kind of opinion survey or something to gather that information. On the question of differential pricing for parking, we have looked into that, and as you say, the technology is potentially there now with ANPR and being able to access registration numbers. What we do with the Lockmeadow Health Club is we offer a concession there for people who are using the club, and the way that works is that if people register with Ringo at the health club, then that system tells our parking attendants that actually they don't need to enforce against that car if it hasn't paid. So we've got a mechanism for doing a concession in individual situations, and there's no reason why we couldn't roll that out more further. Obviously, the Lockmeadow Health Club is a council's facility, and it makes sense for us to offer that to people using the Lockmeadow car park for that. I mean, there definitely are opportunities for the kind of flexible pricing that you mentioned.
Yeah. Before we come to Councillor Parfitt, just a couple of comments that I also wanted to make. I'm really lucky, well, it's a lot of hard work, but I live on a farm, so I can go out and walk my dogs and, see the outside and have some fresh air, but I cannot get over those 50% rises in Moat Park. I just think for a thing that is really one of the jewels in our borough, to penalise people for an extra 50% to come and see it, I just think, personally, I can't get on board with that, and I'm against it. And also with the town centre, if people, if we weren't always hearing comments about how the town centre's got empty shops, people don't like coming here, I could, have a think about that. But when you're trying to make something better, to then actively penalise people 15% to park to come and have a look at it, I can't get on board with that either. You can park at Blue Water for free. We always hear that everything's moved out to Junction 7 with the M&S and the Next there. That's free parking. And I just think this is, for me, this is the wrong strategy going forward when we are trying to revitalise our town centre and bring people here and, make it welcoming, make it that families could stop for just an hour or two rather than penalising motorists in this way. So personally, I can't get on board with that part of the fees and charges, but I'm going to Councillor Parfitt and then Councillor Cannon.
Thank you. I pretty much concur with everything you said there. I've lost this. I've lost where I was actually going to go. I think the crematorium. So, Councillor Keeley made a very good point there that people, bereavement services, it is very expensive. I've had to go through it fairly recently, and I was quite shocked at the cost of it. And people have no choices to do that. And if people are going to, you are forcing people to go down the route of a direct crematorium, and therefore you're going to literally, the burden is then going to be increasingly on those people that actually want to have a proper funeral or something. So I'm not really sure that that's a very good argument. And the other thing, you mentioned, Councillor Cox, about people can save money by buying a season pass. A season pass is only available to those that actually have the funds to purchase in advance. If you are on a really limited income, you're not going to be in a position to do that. And to me, that just strikes of the prepayment meters that people have in their houses. It penalises the poorest in society. So I just can't get on board with these increases, I'm afraid. Thank you. There was something else, but it's gone now, but I've probably spoken of.
Councillor Cox, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, I've got a couple of points. We're talking a lot about percentages, okay? And as I said today in our informal cabinet meeting to our CEO, you can't eat percentages. It's pence and pounds that matters. Many of the increases here are 10 pence, right? So 10p. So it may be 15%, but it's 10p. So just bear that in mind. There are phased and scaled charges depending. So on the crematoria, if you're having a simple cremation, it's a very small percentage uplift because you recognise affordability. But if you're going for the full shebang, then actually the percentage is scaled upwards. I also would just remind everybody in the room that the previous administration, I've only been here for 6 months, the previous administration did not raise prices for 5 years. An element of this is catching up. Okay, we're not going for the 25% that the council's lost in the 5 years by not raising prices. It's actually 15%. But we have to cover the cost of the services that are being used by the people who use them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. As part of the previous administration, I concur with that. That was a specific policy that we had. And we, as all these things, everything's choices. So we made our choices around that. We did not want to raise parking in the town centre. But we did, however, want to increase parking. So that would bring me to my question. We sought to increase the parking spaces at Medway Street, and we started putting that in place. And from recollection, there was another 10 spaces. So 10 spaces, I think it's about £3,000 per year that a car parking space raises. So I think that would get us a revenue in the order of £30,000. Where are we with that project?
Medway Street will come as part of the forward plan. We sat today and we talked about the budget for year one, as in 25-26, and there's money put aside for Medway Street that addresses car parking and some other improvements there.
So we can look forward to that extra revenue then when we're coming forward to the budget that comes in February.
We're talking about the car parking. We haven't yet linked that to revenue in the way you suggested. That work has to be done. It hasn't yet been done, but there's money put aside in the budget, as I said.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Cannon and then Councillor Wilby.
Thank you. I concur with some of the comments that have been made that I don't agree with this increase of 15% parking, and I think the previous 5-year policy was well thought out and sensible because it was about supporting our town centre and the businesses in it. People do, however much parking is, people do always respond to it. That's why they go out to Next. That's why they go to Blue Water. It's one of those odd things that people you will, if you got rid of parking, it'd be a very interesting experiment. Parking charges, that is. But I would not support a 15% increase in charging for parking and the changes at Moat Park, which I think also just don't make sense at all. I also don't particularly think, considering the service that residents have had with their garden waste bins, that should be going up by 5 to 6%. You know, potentially when the waste service is back fully running, then we should be maybe looking at an increase, just a yearly increase in charges. But you know, a lot of residents have had a very poor service in the last year, so I wouldn't want to really see an increase in that. So I would like to propose that we proceed with the recommendations, but we do not adopt the increases in parking or waste.
I'm happy to second that from the chair. Councillor Cox, do you want to come back before we move to the vote on that?
On the garden waste, that was also a challenge we raised, aware that the contract that was implemented by the previous administration did not go smoothly. Exactly that discussion about when would be the right time. We've got an obligation to cover the cost, but actually the way it's being introduced will be sort of like a phased approach with the increase coming later in the term. So yeah, that effectively gives a discount period. So I'm not going to go into the mechanics here, we can do that in a different way, but that discussion's been had. And just very quickly on shopping, when I come in, and I come in much more now I'm councillor than when I did before, I don't see the town centre quiet and I see the car parks full. I think people shop differently to the way we think they do. I think they shop at Blue Water if they want certain brands, and they shop locally if they want convenience. And there's a very different decision-making process on where people shop than we necessarily think. So, thank you.
But I think within locally, we would think that the Next and the Marks and Spencer's is local, and I think that's the conscious thing that we're thinking of. Right, so we've got a proposal on the table, and it's seconded, which is that we approve the fees and charges as detailed in Appendix A, but we do not approve the car parking charges or the waste charges. So can I have votes in favour of that proposal, please? Votes against? That proposal falls. Any other comments? Oh, Councillor Wilby, sorry, apologies.
Yes, it was going to be about the parking, and obviously, just to make a point, from his walk, their parking fees are quite higher than our own ones. That car park is always full. So for convenience, people will pay to get to where they need to get. My question was with the crematorium. Those fees, I take it with the running costs, and I know it's one of our biggest polluters actually, the crematorium as well. With the rise in fuel costs, are those fees linked? And does the crematorium actually make any money, any profit? Or are these fees just an increase so that we actually just break even on and running the crematorium?
It's just covering the costs of the crematorium and overheads.
Right, I can't see anybody else indicating, so the recommendations that we have for this item are on page 95 of your papers, so I'll probably take them all in order, and then we'll just go through votes for and against. So we've noted the contents, we've commented on the contents. So number 2, the fees and charges as detailed in Appendix A be approved. Can I have votes in favour? Number 2. The fees and charges as detailed in Appendix A be approved. Votes in favour. Votes against? We don't have any abstentions. That is carried. The fees and charges policy, which is detailed in Appendix B, is to be noted. Is that noted? Agreed. The fees and charges detailed in Appendix C and D for the other policy advisory committees be noted. Are they noted? And we've got the budget survey results in Appendix E and F. Are they noted? Lovely, thank you. That concludes this item. Thank you, everybody. We we are moving on to item 17, which is the future sustainability of community larders. I'm just going to remind the committee again that we do have yellow papers on this item, so if we decide to start talking about anything within the yellow papers, we'll need to move into part 2, but hopefully we can keep it in part 1 as much as possible. This item is going to be introduced by Councillor Nagy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. This evening's report is to consider the options for the future sustainability of the community larders. Maidstone Borough Council began work in 2021 to address health inequalities in its most deprived communities. Through this work, it was identified that food insecurity was one of the biggest concerns for residents. Grant funding was secured from the West Kent Health and Care Partnership Inequalities Programme and the Shepway Community Larder opened in December 2022. This was followed by Parkwood Larder in July 2023. In September 2023, a third community larder was opened at Trinity, utilising government funding from the Household Support Fund. The larders were designed to provide a long-term sustainable approach to addressing food insecurity and to contribute positively to reducing health inequalities. The wide benefits of the larders have been to reduce food waste and to provide opportunities for volunteering. Making the larders sustainable has been a priority of the project. A one-off sum was allocated for this purpose in the 2024-25 budget. As detailed in the report, a supply engagement was conducted, seeking expressions of interest from local charities and community interest companies. Unfortunately, 2 organisations who showed an interest at that stage 1, in the procurement process, withdrew from the process. The council investigated other possible options. We were introduced to the Bread and Butter Thing, an organisation with established close links with supermarkets, factories and farms to secure and redistribute surplus food that often ends up going to waste because it's wrongly labelled or there is too much of it. In March 2024, the council sought authorisation to single source the Bread and Butter Thing to run the Maidstone Community Larders. We delayed moving forward with the Bread and Butter Thing because a local organisation approached the council and were interested in taking on the community larders. However, they also withdrew their offer. This leaves us with 3 options: close the larders, work with the Bread and Butter Thing, or to deliver the larders in-house, which is not currently budgeted for. Grant funding has ended, but there is enough money remaining for the larders to continue until the end of the financial year. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Higson, start us off.
Good evening. A couple of questions. First, why did the organisations withdraw? The report mentions adding 2 additional wards. Which wards are they? And
if we're going to look at the yellow papers, we might need to move into part 2. So, do you think we will need to?
I'd like an answer to that. So,
Councillor Wilkinson, were you going to?
Yeah, I've got some specific questions about the pricing, Chair. Thank you.
If we're going to discuss anything that's commercial with the offer, we will need to move into part 2. So thank you very much, everybody that's been watching. We're going to need to move into part 2 now to discuss this item. Thank you. We are back in part one now for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, Wednesday the 11th of December. We've just been discussing item 17, which is the community food larders. The reason that we went into part two is because we were referring to the business case proposals put forward by the bread and butter thing. So we've done a lot of digging into all of that, and now we're moving to look at our recommendations. Our available options are on page 174 of the agenda pack. So we have three available options. 3.1, which would be to deliver the community larders in-house. 3.2 would be to do the provision of the community larder through the bread and butter thing, and option 3.3 would be to close the larders. We were just working towards a recommendation, and Councillor Wilby did propose that we go forward with option 3.2, which is to provide the community larder through the bread and butter thing. Looks like I've got a seconder for Councillor Parfitt. Is everybody happy with that motion? Great. So votes in favour then of providing the community larder through the bread and butter thing. Votes against? Abstentions? Thank you, that vote is carried. That was the last item on our agenda for this evening, so thank you all very much, and I close the meeting.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Well, yeah, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.